What's up? This is Patrick Hayes. I've been gone for a little while because things have been kind of chaotic. I'm sure some of you are experiencing that too. But yeah, so I haven't had a chance to really sit down and give as much attention to making videos as I would have liked to. But I'm back, and what I want to talk about today is scientific deception, which in many ways is the Ahrimanic deception, as Rudolf Steiner would call it. But I want to talk about it kind of in context to our understanding of when we look at science, and I want to talk about it in reference to the cosmology that comes from that. And I also want to talk about orienting ourselves in a healthy way towards all this stuff that's going down in the world right now. I think that's really important. So to start off, I'll start actually with that orientation. Right now there's a bunch of stuff happening, and I think that one of the most important things for us to do in these times is to orient ourselves in a healthy way. And I'd like to illustrate that with a point in regards to energy and how we're choosing to frame things. So you take, for example, the idea of growing your own food, right? So the action step of growing your own food, picking out the foods you like, getting a bed, a garden bed, getting it all set up, and getting to plant your own food. That could be done from many different angles, right? So one reason why maybe people may be saying, oh, I want to grow food right now, is due to fear. Oh no, our food is going to be poisoned. The mainstream food is poisoned. You got these people buying up all the farmlands. I'm afraid that I'm not going to have food, and so therefore to protect myself from these evil forces, I'm going to grow food. All right, that could be one reason for why someone's growing food. The actual act of going and building the garden and planting the seeds and all that is the same act as somebody else that maybe is saying, well, I'm going to grow food because I want to be closer to what I eat. I want to be more connected to the earth. I want to be more free. I want to feel fully free and fully independent. And I honor and appreciate the opportunity to be able to be free and sovereign, and so I'm going to take that opportunity. And the action could be exactly the same, right? Depending on whatever angle you're coming at it from. And so this is what I think is really important for us to pay attention to, is that there's a lot of crazy things going on right now. And the cool thing about what's happening is that what we're being asked to do, in a sense, what this is kind of catalyzing for us, is for us to do what we've always wanted to do, to become more free. We've always wanted that, right? But unfortunately, in the old world, it was maybe still too comfortable for us to not stand up and exercise our God-given freedom, right? So we just kind of went along with it because, we could still travel here when we wanted to travel here and go experience this cool stuff and, play within the Matrix game to the degree in which it was convenient for us, right? But now it's turning into something where it's like, well, it's not going to be that convenient considering our values. And when I say our, I'm just assuming that the people watching this have values somewhat similar to mine, in the sense that we value freedom, we value, the ability to make our own decisions about our health and our travel, and I could go into all the different things, right? Our sovereignty to eat clean food, drink clean water, to live freely on the land, right? We value these things, and since we value these things, it's no longer going to be in phase for us to remain in a civilization that is robbing us of those freedoms, right? So that forces us to create a different society, create a parallel society, and become self-sufficient, start taking care of ourselves. So ultimately what I'm trying to illustrate here is that this is what we've always wanted. We've always wanted to be more free, but now we're having to actually do a little bit. It's not as comfortable to remain in the old ways, and so it's catalyzing us to take action on that freedom that we've always wanted. But the healthy frame for this is that we're doing what we've always wanted to do. We're not trying to run away from the bad guys. We're not trying to protect ourselves, right? we're indirectly protecting ourselves by being who we've always wanted to be and actually taking action on that, right? Not just talking about it anymore, not just planning sometime in the future. Now it's like the wave's coming, we got to do it. And I'll get more into that. In fact, this whole kind of orientation has a lot to do with the direction that I want to take things in my life and in my public life with all of you guys. So I'll get more into that as we move forward. But I just wanted to set that orientation there, because I think a lot of the reactions that people are going through right now is like, how do I protect myself from this or that or that? And it's not that it's bad to be aware of negative agendas. In fact, I think it's really important for us to be aware of negative agendas, and we should be aware of some of the things that are rolling out and the negative goals that some of these forces and participants on that agenda have. It's key to know that. But again, the orientation isn't a fight, right? I've said this before. We have to act from creation energy, not reaction energy. So what do we want to create? We want to create this beautiful, free, supportive, benevolent culture that helps people step into their greatness, because that's the infrastructure that we've built naturally to help people step into their greatness, to step into their spiritual development. That's what we want. So let's create that from a place of excitement, from a place of joy, of passion for the virtues that we love in the world, right? That's the space to be coming from this. And by doing that, we'll indirectly thwart the plans of the dark side, right? But it's not about fighting the dark side necessarily in that kind of like conflict sense. There may be moments in which it feels like that, but ultimately the drive is our own desire to be free, to liberate humans, to live in the kind of environments that we've always dreamed of living in, and creating those environments, creating those systems. So with that said, what I want to talk about a little bit today is what I mentioned, the scientific deception, right? So, which is ultimately what Steiner calls the Ahrimanic deception. I want to talk a little bit more about how this is, in a sense, been rolled out, just so that we kind of have enough awareness as to the bigness of the illusion, right? Because we're all kind of becoming aware of more and more. I mean, this is the time where everything's coming to the surface. We're becoming aware more and more of, the attack on our paradigm, right? And how media outlets and false history and false science and all these kinds of different things have shaped our paradigms to serve a negative purpose or a negative agenda, right? And we're all kind of at like varying degrees of realizing, what the deception is. And then, as a subsequent thing that comes from realizing what the deception is the opportunity for us to say, okay, well, maybe there's something else to explore. Maybe there's a different story. Maybe there's a different reality that is more real, that's more supportive, that's more accurate to the true evolutionary path of humanity, right? And this is why it is important for us to explore the deception to a degree, right? But, again, we don't want to get wrapped up in it to the point where, it saturates our energy and we lose that beautiful inspiration to create in a beautiful way, because we're trying to, fight this like war against the deception, right? Because again, then we're not coming from creation energy. It's important for us to be from creation energy, where we're creating the world we want to see. We're not just fighting against the world we don't want to see, right? Key point. So what I want to start with basically is just the idea, and I'm going to actually try to speed this up a little bit. I'm going to try to start with this with the idea of our cosmology, right? So, and what I mean by that, more specifically, is like, what's the cosmology of a human? What is the purpose of a human being in this place, in this realm that we're calling planet Earth, right? What is the purpose of humanity? And that's a really difficult question, and I'm not going to attempt to give you this is exactly what it is. But what I am going to say is that what we think about, I'll say it like this. religions used to give us a cosmology, right? All religions kind of have a cosmology. And if you look at all ancient traditions, they all have very similar cosmologies in the sense that there's a lot of crossover between them, right? But something has happened in the last couple hundred years in which the orientation of humans' consciousness has stopped defining their reality based off of the cosmologies that were given to us from wisdom traditions, and actually leaned more and more towards a scientific explanation of what our cosmology is, right? And this scientific explanation has very much, when we're looking at the mainstream cosmology, has very much reduced our capacity to be connected in spiritual ways to things that are outside of the range of empirical measurement, right? So, in other words, the cosmology that's been taught to us through science is highly materialistic. And this is something that has trickled in over time, right? There's still a lot of people that are highly religious, but nobody can really escape this scientific perspective that is encroached. And there's been many benefits to it, right? So I'm not knocking science altogether. Science is something that's very valuable, but it's something that needs to work in tandem with other levels of consciousness, right? Using it, creating science as a religion, which is ultimately what it's become in many respects. The scientism religion is boxing us into a very reduced perspective of reality. And as a result, there are, you could say, like sicknesses of the spirit, sicknesses of the soul that have ensued, right? Because the cosmology that we've been sold by science is one that is fundamentally very disempowering. The cosmology that science is selling us through the idea of Darwinism, natural selection, and competition, through even like Freudian analysis of psychology and things like Louis Pasteur and germ theory and all these different theories of what a human is or where a human came from, right? That are really still just theories, but have been accepted as the mainstream scientific dogma of what we are as a human, right? But you start looking at what does this perspective actually do to a human mind, to a human soul, right? When we start looking at things from this perspective. Were some mistake that's the result of random mutations over billions of years on some spinning rock out in the middle of nowhere, and nothing exists beyond physical material reality, meaning we're just a random, we're basically slaves to our biology, and there is no soul, there is no spirit. It's just neurotransmitters and neurons firing in the brain. That's what consciousness is, right? See, that perspective. Now, again, not everybody looks at it from this perspective, but everybody is influenced by this perspective. But a lot of people actually do look at it that way. The new religion is science. You know, we could talk about all the parallels between religions too. We could talk about between religions and science. You know, the high priests of the scientific religion of scientism are the doctors in their lab coats. You know, the scientists in their lab coats, and there are a lot of correlations like that, right? The same kind of dogmatic, faith-based orientation that you see in a lot of people see as what's faulted as a fault in traditional religion is just as apparent in scientism, right? All these theories that are not actually proven. There's evidence that could actually be picked apart in a lot of areas quite easily, but it's been sold to us as our reality. And if you question that, that's like blasphemy, right? In the same way, like questioning a certain holy scripture from a particular religion could be considered blasphemy, right? That you can't question anything. So it's very similar in a lot of ways. But see, how this has been orchestrated has been intentional. Now, I'm not saying science is negative altogether. I'll reinstate that. The scientific method is a very powerful way of gathering information. But that is science, ultimately, is the scientific method, right? All the dogmas on the cosmology and what we are and where we came from, those are just theories that people have taken as concrete fact, truths. And that's just not what it is. But what that does to us, thinking that we're just a mistake on a spinning rock out in the middle of nowhere, everything is pointless, is it separates us from our soul and from the spirit, right? It gets us so connected to just clinging to just the material that we become highly materialistic, oftentimes nihilistic, and oftentimes depressed. What is the purpose of life? The purpose then becomes to amass materials in order to perpetuate a life of emotional and physiological pleasures. That becomes the purpose of life, because there's no greater story surrounding the context of what we're actually doing here as a human being, right? It's funny. In the perspective of what is spiritually true, like what is the actual truth about reality, is you can't decouple truth from health. You cannot decouple truth from health. Meaning, if you have a perspective of a cosmology about what you are, and it makes you unhealthy, then there's something fundamentally wrong about it. Because you can't decouple truth from health. This is a spiritual truth. You could say truth in this, from a spiritual perspective, is demonstrated as health. That's an indicator that truth is present, right? When health is present. There's something true about that, right? And this has been forgotten because we could say, oh, factually, this is like, this makes sense in some sort of like a empirical way. We got to realize that, that empirical bandwidth from which we can analyze things with the senses is limited, right? So in all of science really just expands on the traditional five senses, right? So we get telescopes so we can see further, or microscopes so we can see, closer, or, subsonic, measuring devices so we can hear more quiet sounds, right? It's all, we're expanding upon the normal senses. But the truth of the matter is that all that can be seen within that empirical realm is limited. And so what that means is that you can follow that process all the way out to the complete end of categorizing and analyzing everything all the way out to the complete end of what's possible. And at the end, what you'll be left with is an illusion. It'll be illusory. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a domain in which all of that information, all of the scientific empirical data, doesn't have congruency within a certain spectrum. It's very congruent. But to look at just that spectrum, you're cutting out other spectrums that leave you with an illusion, with a reductive perspective of everything, right? And in order to actually expand beyond that, we need to start becoming clairvoyant and using different clairvoyant capacities. We need to be available for different capacities in the human being to blossom. Because otherwise, if we're just trying to limit it all to empirical objective data, we're left with an illusion. And this is essentially what the harmonic deception is it's getting everybody to look at just reality from a materialistic standpoint. Because from a materialistic standpoint, if that's how you're looking at reality, then it can be fudged, it can be manipulated. We can make this particular study look as if this is happening or that's happening, and then draw conclusions and basically puff up this whole perspective that this is the empirical truth and there is no way of contradicting this. Like, this is what it is. But essentially that's just a shadow puppet on the wall. It's like the allegory of the caves, right? The allegory of the caves, the only reason why the people believed that that was their reality is because they were trained to never turn around and see that there was light coming in through the tunnel, right? And that all these shadows on the wall that they were looking at, they thought that was reality. But all the puppet masters are just behind them creating shadow puppets on the wall and telling them that's reality. And yeah, there's a certain degree of congruence with it because, you put these little shadow puppets and you can, create a whole story surrounding that. But just looking at it from the scientific perspective is essentially just looking at the shadow puppets on the wall and not realizing there's another world out there where all the light's peering through. It's even giving the opportunity for them to create shadows. And so the Ahrimanic deception has used science to replace religion as a materialistic perspective because people are much more manipulatable from that perspective. And ultimately, the end goal is because it separates people's soul from their body. They don't even believe in soul, right? So in all the different, health protocols or medical tyranny, all this different stuff is being rolled out. It's being rolled out from this perspective that there is no human soul, right? And we can prove, this is what this does and this is what that does, and there's a whole line of logic within that realm. But it's this limited spectrum. Ultimately, that realm's just an illusion. That realm is still valid, but it needs to be and when it's understood, the scientific empirical data is understood within the greater context of spirituality, it becomes complementary to these higher spiritual dimensions. And then it's extremely valuable, right? But if the other ones the higher spiritual dimensions are taken out of the equation, then the Wizard of Oz can create whatever kind of, false puppet that it wants by propping up different seeming, fake empirical data to make it look like whatever they want to make it look like, right? And, you see this with, scientists that are paid off to do particular research projects to get a certain result. I mean, to think that a scientist can't be paid off the same way that a politician can be paid off is just naive, right? So this is happening all the time, right? But since there's a way of propping up the pieces to empirically or physically to make it look like, this is what it is and this was the result, then people think, that's the reality. And there's no way to see outside of that because people haven't been taught that they have a soul and they have a spirit and that actually you can use higher faculties to be able to cut through the BS and see the truth in things. So what is the agenda? Well, we could get very detailed about all the different things that are rolling out and, what is this next thing going to be for, and, they want to put up 5G towers and they want to, inject people, make people robots, and they, transhumanism and all this kind of stuff, right? And we could go into all those details, and to a degree, those things I feel are necessary to understand. But ultimately, I think one of the primary things to be aware of is ultimately this is about separating human beings' soul from their bodies, because there are beings that want access to the bodies. Because there's beings that have went off their natural evolutionary path and are now not capable of incarnating in bodies, and that mixed with just other, conscious beings, conscious forces that would like access to the physical realm, access to incarnating in a body, but the nature of what they are is so out of phase with the biological suit that we exist in as humans, that they need to modify that suit in order for it to kind of be phase coherent. I guess you could think of it like that. And so when you start looking at the GMOs and the toxins in the food and the toxins in the environment, and I've made other videos about the 4 elements all being hacked, right? So if you haven't seen those, you can go back and look those videos up. But how all the different 4 elements have all been basically hacked, and so we're drinking unclean water and drinking, breathing unclean air, eating unclean food, right? All these different things it's because you can think of like our DNA as being like an antenna to our soul, right? Our soul communicates and connected to our spirit and our higher self, communicates to us in kind of like a conscious way, in like our walk around energy, communicates to us through that. You can see like DNA is like an antenna that brings that information in. And so in order to cut off our soul from our body, there needs to be interference in that signal, right? And so toxins create interference. Chemicals, heavy metals, all sorts of different things create interference in that communication, right? And this thing creates the ultimate interference. And that's ultimately what that's for, is to separate that soul, because this is how demons get in. This is how, the same thing with like alcohol, right? You've probably heard about the idea of alcohol and how alcohol is connected to, like the reason why they call it spirits is because spirits possess people's bodies when they get drunk. Well, essentially what's happening is that when you get drunk, it brings your biological suit into a frequency that's low enough that there are certain beings get access to it that didn't have access to it before, right? And it's not just a cut and dry thing. It's like, that like a being's possessed or they're not possessed. There's many, many different in-between stages. But essentially, to be fully realized, you would have full control over your whole autonomic system. So you wouldn't have a subconscious anymore. So just think of it in terms like that, right? Part of the evolution of humanity, the natural progression, is for us to become super, super conscious and super, super present within the body. So you think of like a yogi that can slow their heartbeat down to almost nothing, or slow their metabolic rate and their digestion down to almost nothing, right? Because they don't have a subconscious in a sense. Like normally that autonomic system that kind of runs on its own, they have so much I am presence there that permeates through that area, and they can actually consciously take control of it, right? But essentially all areas in which we're not fully embodied are areas in which other things get in. Other things can get in, and are, but that's part of our evolution. In the same way we have microbacteria on our skin, there's other beings, like on your skin at all times. There are these, different bacteria and stuff. There's spiritual beings influencing and working with us or against us at all times also. But essentially where they can get in is where the ones that we don't want to can get in, is through those areas in which we're not fully conscious, right? So if you're extremely traumatized, right, and you've cut off energy flow to a particular chakra, a particular meridian system because of that trauma, that area is numb and offline. Therefore, that area can, another being can get into it. But when you bring your conscious loving awareness, which is part of the process of healing, to that, you become aware of it, you come back online there, then you're taking up the space with yourself and something can't inhabit it anymore, right? So essentially, the agenda is to separate the soul from the human body so other things can come in, right? And the idea of synthetic organs and cyborgism and transhumanism, all this kind of stuff is all part of that process, to separate us from that so they can come in and have access to this physical realm. And ultimately, this consciousness it doesn't need biological life in order to incarnate. So you see where this impulse, as it works through many different people in many different ways, has created so much turmoil for the environment, because it doesn't need biological life. And essentially it wants a mineral life form that it can live forever in order to basically escape the inevitable deterioration of consciousness that happens in this scattered eighth sphere realm, which it will wipe it back to its, to its primary, there's a mosquito here, wipe it back to its primary, like base level consciousness, right? So it will lose, all sense of identity and go back to the very base level consciousness. And so it's fighting against that. So now again, there's so many different layers we could get into this whole thing of how electromagnetic frequencies are used, and how different manipulation has been used on the consciousness of getting perspectives to land in people that separate them from their truth and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, this process is a matter of trying to separate us from our bodies. And so what that means, in a sense, is it's a process for us of becoming more embodied, working through our shadow work, working through those traumas, right? And coming more into our body, not trying to escape, right? The Luciferic path, not trying to escape or try to avoid it, but actually coming into our bodies and being more present, bringing that I am presence fully into us, right? And so, again, the good news is that it's not that we have to fight these dark sources, because our natural evolution anyway is coming more into the body, right? To spiritualize the body. This is the path of the Christ, right? The resurrection. He spiritualized his body, fully permeated with divine I am presence. And that literally alchemizes the physical body, Now, that's something that realistically is probably quite a ways off, quite a few lifetimes away for the vast majority of us. But this alchemy that's happening is an alchemy in the astral body, in our thinking, in our emotions, in our will center. It's an alchemy in our etheric body, in our prana, and our chi energy, and it's an alchemy all the way down to the physical body. Right? And it is essentially about merging our higher self all the way down into the physical. Right? So what I'm saying is that this is our evolution. So it's not about fighting these beings. It's like this is what we're like naturally by just evolving, we're indirectly transmuting these negative agendas, right? And then how does that perpetuate into our everyday lives? And this is where I want to bring a lot of focus coming up is to freedom, to sovereignty. And what are all those areas that this is important for us to focus on, right? Food, electricity, privacy, health, financial sovereignty, financial freedom, right? Spiritual freedom, which is a lot of what I've been talking about. Discernment, being able to discern, a negative force that is trying to manipulate you, and then how to choose your true path. Legal sovereignty. There's many different areas, right, that are really important for us to focus on. Basically, every single area for a new society. But this is exciting. This is what we've always wanted. We've always wanted a culture and a society that where the values surrounding that are uplifting for humanity, that help us move in this path of spiritualizing ourselves. Right? We've always wanted that. So now's our chance. This is our opportunity. So with all that said, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your presence today. And if you like this video, please share it. You can join me on my Telegram page, Telegram. It's Patrick Hayes Live and Patrick Hayes Channel on Telegram. So either one of those, Patrick Hayes Live or Patrick Hayes Channel. Live is more where there's open chats in the community, and channel is the channel where I'm posting these videos. So we have that. Join us there. We'd love to have you. And lastly, what I wanted to mention is that I'm now actually making myself available once again for one-on-one coaching. It's something I haven't been doing for quite some time because I was working with this other outfit, but my time with them is finished. And as I'm coming back into the coaching world, to the mentorship world, what I've put together is a 9-hour master course that is part of the coaching package. So what I'm offering right now is a 9-hour master course that you can go through at your own pace, and then we can work one-on-one to integrate the different information and to particularize it for your specific needs. So it's a really incredible course. Has a lot to do with the evolution of the soul that I've been talking about, and this alchemization process that we're going through. And it breaks down a much more vast, integrated cosmology that is extremely healthy for humans, that really empowers them to continue on their natural evolutionary path. So if you're interested in going deeper with me in this regard, hop on Telegram, shoot me a Telegram message, or you can put a little line in one of the comments beneath this video. And I'd love to connect with you and see if this is right for you. I don't have a whole lot of slots for it. I have a limited amount of time. So if this is something that feels exciting to you, make sure you reach out to me. Okay, much love, and I'll talk to you next time.